today we're very lucky to be joined by the Honourable Larry Anthony AO, founder and chairman currently at the SAS Group. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Charlie, and pleasure to be here, Will.
Thanks, Larry. So we might jump straight into it. 1996. Do you want to take us inside the four walls of what federal parliament's like?
Yeah, well, I suppose, 1996 is when I was elected to Parliament. I did have a go in 1993 and failed at that attempt, and that was just for those that are political junkies. That's when Keating won the unlosable election, right? Or Houston lost. Anyway, got elected in 1996, and then I had basically a parliamentary career for 3 terms, and I think anyone who seeks public office it should be encouraged. And look, I'm a bit agnostic now. I mean, as long as we just need good people to be part of democracy. I'm not a great zealot for the Greens, don't get me wrong. But, the country's made up of many different views, right? So you just want good people in the Parliament. But I do think it helps if you've got some practical experience, right? If you've lived a bit of experience outside of just in a political office or growing up that way. I was a bit different because I was sort of grew up in it because of previous family associations. But anyway, so I had a interesting ride for 9 years in Parliament.
Yeah, wow. And your time sort of in Parliament, you weren't sort of sitting there and letting everyone else get to work. You certainly got in the thick of it, and you spent 5 years as a minister within the Howard government. Can you maybe sort of give our listeners a bit of a background as to sort of that pathway to being one of the chosen ministers under probably one of Australia's most recognised prime ministers?
Yeah, well, John Howard, he was a very interesting guy, and obviously he had lots of political defeats. Right?
Yep.
So if you had a conversation about John Howard in 1994, you'd think he was just written off because he'd been the leader a number of times. He actually served under my father when he was treasurer in the Fraser government. So a much younger man, clearly back then. And so certainly in that first term, it was like anything. We'd been in opposition for a long time, and we kind of floundered a bit. And when I first got in there, it was March in 1996, and then about 3 weeks later, we had Port Arthur. And for those that we should remember, of course, that was tragically the largest sort of massacre of innocent lives. And so gun laws were then introduced almost straight away, which wasn't on the political agenda. To Howard's great credit and courage, and Tim Fischer, who was also the leader. So that was the first big issue, right? And for a lot of our constituencies, that was an anathema, because taking firearms, right? Taking firearms away from them, it was like a personal invasion of their rights. So that was really, really tricky. But as history has shown, the right decision, right? We're not a country like the United States or other parts of the world. But anyway, during that period, you're a backbencher. I had a very marginal seat, right? So I just had a very young family. So every time you're back from Parliament, you're really campaigning all the time because you're worried you're just going to get the arse. Yeah. Because I had before, and it was tough. And the area I represented was called Richmond, not to be confused with Richmond down in the football team. Or
I'm thinking Dusty Martin.
So, but it's on the Richmond River, right, which is Federation seat, northern New South Wales. So really from Tweed Head, south of the Gold Coast, taking the Tweed Valley, Byron Shire, and Ballina, and the Richmond River's on the bottom of that. So there's an area with huge changing demographics, which we'll talk about that later. Lots of seed changes, tree changes, and eventually demographics caught up with a National Party person. Anyway, and then Howard made me a minister. So I was a junior minister in trade, and then did basically social security. Not that you get a choice about this. He kind of...
Yeah, how does it work?
So he just throws you into it?
Well, you kind of got to be... In the National Party, you're nominated really by the leader of the time, who was Tim Fischer. Or if it's Howard, he directly chooses.
Yep.
It's different to the Labor Party because you've got factions there, you've got quotas, who's from the left, who's from the right.
Oh, right, yeah.
What state. so we don't have factions in our, National Party. But I suppose it's really up to the leader of the day to see who's got talent, who does he want to promote. And I was a very young guy, right? I was in my mid-30s and ended up, Howard rings up, do you want to be the Minister for, Community Services, which essentially was, the spending side of stuff. Centrelink,
Wow.
child support
It's a
agency.
huge budget you oversee.
Yeah, it's a really big budget.
Would that have been the largest in the portfolio at the time?
Yeah, it was. And then I worked with a series of different ministers. And then I had a couple of iterations of that over 5 years. So I got to know. Yes, I was the longest serving minister, I think still today, of Centrelink, which is the biggest.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think our budget was about 80 or 85 billion, which is about a third of the Commonwealth. There's a lot more now, of course.
Yeah.
So a lot of big spending programs. So I could write a lot of checks, but I wasn't creating wealth, I was spending it.
Yeah, wow, interesting. And we'll delve into, I guess, that maybe as a topic, because like that sort of spending of taxpayer funds obviously comes with a lot of attention and noise around it. How did you go about managing sort of the political and ideological forces that are at play there?
Well, look, over time, governments, and I think when you look back now, it's kind of regrettable, but there's just more and more intervention of government in people's lives. Pre-war, there was very little dependency on the government. People were independent; they had to be. There was a basic pension, and then with the centralisation of taxation in the Commonwealth, social security payments. So at that time, most of the spending is regulated. So about 87% is probably pensions. It could be, at the time, disability pensions. It could be unemployment benefits. It could be aged care. So it's all sort of very regulated. And then you've got the top end. But as time morphed on, and I think, probably the Howard government was kind of responsible. We introduced all these family tax benefits, universal childcare. So spending went up, right? And look, it was meant to be helping Middle Australia, which it did. But then you start to bake in these expenditures that you can't really remove, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise you get thrown out of office.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to a point now, fast forward to 2025, where there's just massive amounts of government expenditure going out, and they're scrambling to try to find revenue. So, we kind of kicked a lot of that off during that period. But by the same token, we paid off all the Commonwealth debt. And as you guys, and you're in the financial markets, when I went out of office, there were no government bonds. We bought them all back.
Really?
They didn't exist, right? Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
That's
Zero
a
debt.
foreign
Zero
concept
debt.
today.
We left money in the bank that Peter Costello had, which is like 40 billion to set up the future fund, and zero debt. And look what our debt's going to now. It's Commonwealth debt. Well, total debt's trading up to $1 trillion. Commonwealth debt is probably 600.
Of that.
So it's a very different period.
No wonder they're having a look at all sorts of different things to tax as well.
Absolutely.
Raise some revenue. Yeah.
Got to, at some point, you got to pay it back. And I was sort of preparing for this podcast. I read an article published by one of your staff at the SAS Group around sort of the Behind the Glass and Marble was the name of the piece, and Alana was her name, and she makes a quote that resonated pretty strongly, I think, with Will and I. And it's likely, and this was the quote, and it's likely that what we see through the glass and the headlines is in reality quite different, which has sort of prompted Will and I, when we were talking before the podcast, around getting your thoughts on some of the common misconceptions and misrepresentations of members of parliament and politics and how it actually works.
Well, look, I lament in one sense because the profession or to seek public office, certainly in yesteryears, was seen as a sort of a noble profession, right? And again, I think it was in a period where there was less dependency on government, right, by Australian voters. And so now there's, I think, I don't think surveys have shown that there's more high levels of distrust with public officials. So sort of the same level as used car salesmen. And I think also they're there's more cynicism, more scepticism. So as a public official, it's a lot harder really to make decisions because you're being judged almost instantaneously.
Every time.
When I was in Parliament, in the Howard era, which is different now, like these things
Yeah.
were just coming into existence, right? So social media didn't really exist. So now, of course, if you're a public official, if you're trying to make major policy change for which the country needs, right? People got to have some guts to make some decisions. The problem is you haven't even finished your sentence, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not just the fourth estate, let's say like News Corporation or ABC or Fairfax Media, but it's of course all the influencers
Yeah,
or
Twitter
everyone,
and
Twitter,
everything.
everyone,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
just going for you, right?
Those-
And of course all those algorithms are just reinforcing your prejudices or your biases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They know what you like and they just keep feeding
So I
you
think
that.
this is a real challenge, right, for politicians now. And most politicians think, oh, well, they're just slagging each other off in question time or they're getting paid too much, et cetera, et cetera. But look, it doesn't matter what political party you've got to work extremely hard, right? It's government makes up a third of the economy. It's very dynamic. You're being judged every 3 years. You're being judged by your peers all the time. If you don't perform, you're going to get the arse. Your private life is totally exposed. So you've got to be a lot more vigilant. You've got to be more aware. And I just hope in time that the public, and I think it's, there's probably a period of stability now with the Albanese government that, because really people want government out of their lives, or they say that.
Yeah.
So there's actually quite a lot that gets done in Parliament. It's not just question time where it's theatre time.
Yeah.
That's what people see, right?
Yeah, because that's what you see in the short snippet I go home and watch on the news.
And I remember when I was there, mate, I just, it's like your peers are judging and I just wanted to throw grenades onto the opposition, right? And you're trying to be witty as well as answering the questions.
Be a bit of fun.
But then again, there's a lot of legislation that goes through. Clearly, that's bipartisan, that's debated, a lot of committees. So there's a lot of actually good work that's done in the Parliament. But I think what the public see, is a very different view.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense.
Do you have any favourite moments from question time that you want to share?
That's probably a bit on the spot, but yeah.
Oh, well, I remember one night I had a lot of I was quite young, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the other National Party people were a lot older than me, and they came round one night when I was a minister, and we had some tricky legislation, and foolishly invited them round for a drink, and then it was like they were still there, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you got pretty good stamina in those days, but so I came in the next day, and my office had bottles of alcohol around my staff. What has gone on, right? Anyway, so then I sort of, you're trying to recover. And that day in question time, because there are 10 questions the opposition asked, 10 questions that the government, Dorothy Dix's.
Yeah.
And I had 10 questions on me, right? Just pounding me. So I've had a bit of a hangover. So I never did that again.
Never before question time.
But it's, I enjoy the combat. And you've got to think on your feet. And I think that's where... And I think that's quite different in Australia, the Westminster system, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're in a republic, let's say like in the United States, if you're the president, or equivalent to our prime minister, you're never confronted, right?
No.
It's all choreographed, it's all controlled. But so you have to be across not only your portfolio, but if you're in a senior leadership position, you've got to be across every issue. So I think it actually makes you better prepared, right? You understand the issues, you've got to be agile. You're match fit. You're match fit all the time, which is very different in other democracies that don't have a Westminster system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess sort of stepping back a bit, like your family's obviously been a huge part of that system here in Australia for, I think Will and I were amazed. I'm pretty sure the Anthony family is the only family to have 3 generations that have held ministerial duties at the federal level. Wow, like that's pretty incredible. Do you maybe want to sort of shed some light on the Anthony household as you were growing up and sort of those early influences from Larry Senior and Doug?
Yeah. Well, it is unique because you're right, and because there's been other families, but it's either one's been the House of Reps or the Senate, but we've all come from the same seat.
Yeah.
I thought, my grandfather, who I'm named after, he was a Gallipoli veteran.
Wow.
Right? He came back and he was fiercely independent, right? And he actually got thrown out of Parliament more times than anyone else till about, I don't know, 8 decades later. A guy called Wilson Tuckey. He was a rebel from Western Australia. A good guy. And then he was a minister during the war years.
Wow.
He didn't always get on with Bob Menzies, right? Because he came back from the front.
Yeah.
But he was a tough guy. He was Postmaster General at the time. He was in control of all the communications, postal service. So it was a big portfolio back in those days. He died, and my father never really sought Parliament, but he kind of got catapulted into it at a very early age, the age of 27, and then he had a big career. And then many years later, I came along. So my grandfather served 20 years. Doug served 27, and I reduced the batting average considerably.
Came in at number 11. And
Exactly. And then I got retired by popular demand by the citizens of Richmond.
I've been there. My 4 off 40.
One story I will tell you, which seems to have gone into the lexicon, is that when my father was acting PM, he was a pretty laid-back guy, so he said, if the country's on holidays, I'm on holidays. So we'd always go down to the beach.
Yep.
So initially, my father, acting PM, he didn't even have a phone, right? And he refused to have one, which Malcolm Fraser, the Prime Minister, did not like. And then he'd have to get reminded by the lady at the so the Prime Minister would ring the local shop down by the beach. I want to talk to Doug, get him. She'd have to walk round to where we had this old garage. He'd have to come back to a public telephone. Literally, I'd have to get 20-cent pieces, and he'd have to line up there with the...
Lucky there was no hacking back in those days. Discussing government policy on the public telephone.
No, they'd be lining up, and I'd have to feed in the 20-cent pieces, and inevitably they'd cut out. So eventually he got a caravan. So the guys security used to love coming and staying with him because they'd camp by the beach, and
that's awesome.
You'd go fishing with him, and as he ran the country during the summer.
Yeah, wow. There you go.
There you go.
You can do it now.
I was going to say, acting PM, calling via the public payphone is certainly probably a thing of the past. As you rightly point out. Good one.
And then so just also prior to your political career, you obviously spent a bit of time in the financial markets. So you're at Merrill's for a bit, Peter Warburg. Yeah. What'd you learn in those roles that sort of set you up for the political life as well?
Well, interestingly, when I was much younger, I wanted to... agriculture was my passion. And then when I left school, I was sent to work in the cotton fields in California, and I had a whole year.
California?
Yeah,
wow.
And then I hitchhiked across California, and then I had all these adventures, and that changed my world, really, when I decided, I was going to go to ag college, going to go farming.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, I thought, it's a much bigger world. So that's when I went to University of New South Wales, and then I kind of fell into the stockbroking, investment banking world. Went through the crash. So, I think what it did for me is that you learn. I think everything is interconnected, isn't it? And particularly if you're a politician, it's like, and the speed, the velocity of the way the world moves. Like we talked about social media, so whatever happens in financial markets will ricochet through.
Yeah.
As we know now, right? So I think understanding, because at the time I registered in the New York Stock Exchange, Chicago Mercantile, so you get a feeling of just the dynamics of financial markets, and really, I think that really helps you if you're a politician. It's not just about understanding parish pump stuff, but the interconnectivity. Yeah. And of course, that's what politics is about too. You've got to see things before they happen. Yeah. Ideally.
Yep.
Yeah.
No,
so you were over in the US when you were working at those places. You're based in the US. Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a while. It was in the World Trade Centers actually before they came down.
Yeah.
Anyway, different era. But I think anyway, look, I think that financial literacy helps you just throughout life. And as I said, there's the law of physics happens everywhere, including politics.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I guess like through sort of that journey, I imagine you would have been thinking towards potentially a career in public service, but was it What was the catalyst for, taking you out of?
Well, look, I grew up in a political family, right?
Yeah.
So I saw it as a child. I was always fascinated. I never thought the situation would present itself because I was living in Sydney at the time. And, maybe I should have gone to the Liberal Party, but it was playing well. And then my father's old seat, when he retired, another person got it, and then they lost the seat, right? It was really unusual. So then I thought, oh, here's an opportunity. So I got involved with the rail project, and then I decided to, I call it, leave the salad days, which they were great days living in Sydney. And, you paid well, not doing a lot, and had lots of fun, but it wasn't me, right? And I did want to do something of more substance, and so that's when I moved back to northern New South Wales. Later with my young wife, and then and it took me a couple of attempts to get in.
Yeah, it's interesting, that journey, because I think, and you sort of touched on it earlier around your frustration, that there's, it's not considered, like back then I imagine it was probably still considered somewhat noble to pursue public office and the betterment of your country. And there's, I think, a lot of people who are quite passionate about us as Australians and what we stand for. And but these days, I think of all the smart people that would be great politicians and, great fiduciaries of, taxpayer money, that never sort of take that leap.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons we've just explained. You're totally exposed, right? When you get into public life, it's not your life, right? Your life is taken away from you, essentially, and particularly if you've got a young family. Look, I also think, people on this podcast may disagree, but there used to be a super scheme there, where if you serve a number of terms, then you can be eligible for that. Because what happens for most people that fall out of, most people leave office in defeat, right?
Yeah.
So they have to restart again, and often people don't want to touch politicians, particularly if your team has just been booted out of office.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be that influential
and
necessarily.
So it's high risk, right, whether you do that. Back to me, though, I had an unusual situation because generally when you run for a seat, right, so you pick your political party, you've won the pre-selection, then it's all about raising your profile. Okay? Because you've got to raise your profile because at the end, politics is about, with our compulsory preferential system, it all goes to the middle, right?
Yeah.
It's not polarised, again, like in the UK or the US, where it's first past the post or some crazy system. You've got to get 50.1% of the vote in the House of Representatives or in lower house chambers across the state parliaments.
Yeah.
So at the end, it's that 6% margin. That's what you're fighting for, those swinging voters. And so people getting to know you is pretty important in that equation. In my situation, everyone knew who I was because I was an Anthony in this area, right? And they probably thought, oh, he's just a silver tongue, we're not going to like him. We know who you are, mainly because I was a proxy of my father. Well, that's what they thought. I lost in my second campaign. I said to myself, how am I going to get away from always being in his shadow? And I got on a push bike well before the poly pedals, and I had a caravan behind me, and I rode on a push bike all around Richmond. And very important in Byron Shire, because there's a lot of greenies there, right?
Yeah.
I don't like it. And when you turn up to someone on a push bike, whatever preconceived ideas they have just evaporate, right? Because they just, it's like whatever, if you're a left wing, right wing, you're on a push bike. And it was very good because then it re-established myself in my own name.
Wow.
As opposed to who I was. So it was a very good way to recalibrate. And I think today in politics, you still got to come up with new ways to try to hit people so they see you as you are. If Will or Charlie, you decide to do it, or other people on your podcast, rather than just relying on the party.
Interesting.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, that might be a good segue into SAS Group. Do you want to give us a high-level overview of what you do there?
Yeah, well, that was sort of set up about 15 years ago, and so we're a government relations firm, but we're the largest now in Queensland. And as I said beforehand, at least a third of the economy is plugged into government, right?
Yeah.
So it has an enormous impact on our lives. And as we've started this podcast, most people have got no idea what happens in government, right?
No.
Yeah.
And it is a bit opaque, right? So you've got the public officials, elected officials, then you've got all their staff, right? Then you've got the departments. These are all the bureaucrats there, and generally they've got tenure. So, they're there for a long time in different cultures. And then, of course, you've got all the constituencies. So what our role at SAS is really to help the private sector and all not-for-profits to say, okay, have you got a problem? How do we help navigate this, particularly when it comes to your interface with government? So that could be on policy, it could be on some type of legislative arrangement, it could be trying to promote a business. So we do a lot of advocacy work, but we also do a bit of corporate work. And I found it quite interesting because it's a bit like politics. You're covering so many issues. So 1 minute you're over here, we do a lot on resources, right? And both on the fossil fuel sector and renewable sector. We do a lot in the not-for-profits, right? So it could be faith-based organisations, other private sectors. So it's very diverse, and I kind of like that. I'm a bit older now, so I try to help mentor other people or how they do that. But it's again, as I said beforehand, everything is interconnected, right? If something moves, if the dial moves there, it's going to affect you over there. So, and most people don't understand how that works, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah, because it was set up, and you mentioned sort of the diversity of work that you guys cover, and probably the diversity of thought that comes from that. It's a bipartisan firm that I think you set up with someone that was from the other side of politics to you for a long time. And can you talk us through the thesis behind that? I guess it's somewhat explained by your previous answer.
We're a bipartisan firm.
Yeah.
Some firms aren't. They're very partisan. So you rise and fall on the government. But if you're in business, right, or if you're running a not-for-profit, I mean, it doesn't matter what government's in. You've still got to go through the cycles, and everything is in cycles. Like now, the LNP's back in Queensland, right? Yeah. So they should be there for a long time if they don't screw it up. They went through that lesson a few years ago. So our view is, and then of course in Canberra now, there's they've got a massive majority, right? The majority that Albanese has now, 94 seats in the House of Representatives, was exactly the majority that Howard had when I got first elected.
Oh,
so it's totally
94.
It's a total inverse now, right? But the Liberal Party is much weaker now. So our role, it's just that it's we've got red team, Labor people, Conservative. Don't have anyone from the Greens. That's I suppose maybe an ideological problem there, but. And we can get on quite well, and yet we're all still quite connected. I mean, I was the president of the party for a long time. I mean, others are involved with their party, but when we come together as a business, it's there's a lot of camaraderie. And I think the difference is that if you've directly been a minister with Labor or Liberal or National or whatever, once you leave, I think there's not that. Adversarial relationship anymore, right? It's like you've been at school together. You've been in different football teams, but you've left now, and you generally, if you pick the right people, it works pretty well, and it has for SAS.
Yeah, fantastic.
And over the 15 years, have you seen much change in how the government, that interplay between government and private sector?
Oh, definitely. There's been a lot of change. I think certainly in our business, because we do have people who are registered lobbyists. There's been lots of changes in that space, and also you find, and we're not in there, but other firms that end up actually being involved in campaigns, right? And of course they're heavily involved in the campaign, and then they're employed in the government, and there are conflicts that are there. But I think what we're seeing is that government's getting more complex. Getting through. It's not just about getting through, but you've got to have the right arguments. Why you've got to be there. I think the bureaucracy is very important. And so, and it's not just the advocacy. A lot of it's communications, right? If you have a front page story on the Courier Mail getting stuck into you as a minister, you'll read it, won't you?
Yeah, 100%.
You'll start to move the dial. Or now with the influence on social media. So the world's changing so much, and people are getting their information differently. Particularly your generation.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, interesting. And I guess in terms of sort of like where you're seeing some strong demand, you mentioned like the breadth of different clients that SAS Group can sort of work with.
Yeah.
Is there a certain pockets of the economy that you guys, I think you mentioned resources, but is there a typical archetype of client, or is it often very variable and circumstances
Yeah,
based?
well, look, it's sort of grown by metamorphosis, really. But
Yeah.
as I said, Queensland is a unique state, right?
Yeah.
And I come from New South Wales, but I like living in Queensland. So it's you've got a big resource sector, you've got a big ag sector, you've got a big commercial building sector. It's the most decentralised state, totally different to every other jurisdiction.
right.
You've only got one parliament, one lower
Yep.
house, no upper house.
Yeah.
You've got one council, essentially Brisbane City Council,
Yeah.
which gets things done. So things actually can get done in Queensland far more rapidly than in any other state. Right?
Interesting.
If I was living in Sydney or Melbourne, I would have 24 councils that I'd have to deal with. Where here, it's just generally Brisbane City Council, right? Unless you're going to Logan or Redlands or something.
Yeah.
So that makes it a big difference. If I'm in another state, I have to get through the upper house, but like the Senate.
Yeah.
No upper house here.
Yeah.
Winner takes all. So if the government of the day decides to do X or Y, bang, it happens. So it's a very different dynamic. So things can happen for good or for bad very quickly.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a better arrangement.
Yeah. You can get things
and
done.
you just want to make sure that there's no irresponsible government that gets into power. But I certainly think in the resources sector now, that's where it's really hurting. I think in the coal industry, it's really hurting.
Yeah, it seems to be quite hard.
With this royalty regime, and people think, they can afford to pay it. Well, as I said, Queensland is a big regional state. When I go to the airport a lot every morning, if you go there early, there's only one uniform there.
Yeah, we catch some early flights.
And they got the stripes, and they're the ones that are paying the royalties, powering up this state, right? Providing the housing, providing the police force, providing the nurses. It's income from resources, essentially. So you've got to get that balance right? Okay, we've got the state and the nation needs to have its fair share, but you don't want to kill the golden goose. And I think we could be in that space. I think the energy sector is also really important on this whole transition. Can we get there? How far should we go? How much detriment are we putting Australia in? Because what I fear is that we are deindustrialising. Okay, we used to be quite an advanced economy. We're not that advanced anymore because all the big heavy manufacturing has gone. Right, it's all gone offshore. The last big smelters, the last big refineries, mate, we've count them on your hands, right? So you've got to be able to produce basic stuff. So I think, as I said, that's what we're dealing with a lot of the time.
Interesting.
And then, as I said, dealing with a range of other clients.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And we hope, our motto at SAS is that we can make Australia a better place. We can make a bit of a difference. And I think in some areas that we do, because we, as I said, I understand the interconnectivity.
Yeah.
If you turn the dial here, on the coal royalties, for instance, Japan very upset, right? Very upset because we're denying them energy. And maybe that's why they won, a big shipping contract recently, which is to build our next frigates.
Yeah, wow.
Which is a good thing. That was a good policy decision made.
Yeah, wow. That's interesting. And I guess, do you foresee, like you mentioned Queensland and how, because I do find it interesting, like obviously you held your seat in Richmond and you spent a lot of time in Sydney. Like why Queensland? Was it because of a lot of those? I'm sure there's probably some family reasons as well, but
yeah. No, well, the family still has a farm in northern New South Wales. I could have moved back to Sydney or elsewhere. I had elderly parents. I still got an elderly mother. So we just, and all my life was plugged into Sydney. Or Canberra, right? Not here, right? Even though it's
that's
only
what I was thinking.
20 minutes from the border, hardly ever went up here. But I'm glad I made the decision for kids' education and all sorts of things, because I think it's Queensland, Brisbane is looking forward.
Yeah.
Right? It's like an Asian city now. It's got that feel. Obviously, they've won the Olympics bid. So a lot can happen. And a lot of that is exactly what I've explained to you. The organs of government are very different than in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide. So you can get stuff done here. what these guys are just going to have to do is that we've also got this crazy debt, right?
Yeah.
Like every state. So how do you manage that, right? We've got to contain that. Otherwise, you know, you guys will end up paying for it.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, printing money is the way to go.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the dollars you mentioned things moving the dial on policy space and the impact that can then have in financial markets.
Yeah.
A lot of the investors that Will and I have started speaking to through this program, like a lot of them are starting to say, yeah, we're definitely starting to turn our eyes towards Brisbane for a lot of the reasons that, you know, historically they'd probably look down towards Melbourne, but it's on the flip side quite hard to get things done down there relative to what you were saying.
Case
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
You know, they're just taxing their way out of existence. But yeah, so that's why they're moving here, and it's been cheaper. It's not as cheap as it used to be, whether it's housing or education, cost of living, energy. Right, this is the last state that has all the energy. They own all the transmission lines. They own all the power stations.
Yep.
You know, so it's very different to other states. And then, of course, a really big challenge, you know, is, like in public life, is what the next phase of what's happening with AI. You know? So it's like big tech now, the Magnificent Seven or the Magnificent Five out of NASDAQ, they're ruling the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, fantastic. And I guess interesting sort of background we've now managed to give our listeners on your public life, private life. We're thinking sort of going some more general leadership-related questions because you've seen leadership in a few different environments. I guess of the good leaders that you've worked with and under, and even seen rise under your leadership, what are some of the traits do you think that really define the best from, you know, the average?
Yeah, I was having this discussion with a guy who wrote a book recently on leadership, and you know, are you born with it? Is it just innate? I think it's circumstances. You know, what sort of cometh the outcome of the man or cometh the woman doesn't matter. So I think circumstances do then start to demonstrate qualities in humans that you need to get through issues. So I think trust is really important, right? You've got to have a rapport or establish trust with whatever organisation that you're trying to influence. Right? So if they don't trust you, you're not going to get very far, right? Then I often think that some of the best leaders are people who generally have a fair bit of humility. You know, if you're an alpha person, and a lot of us are, that can only go so far, right? Whereas, and I've seen people like John Howard, for instance. You know, he was in a leadership position for a long time. You think of Australian Prime Ministers, those that succeed are generally been in the Parliament for a long time. So they've gone through the valley of death, they've seen it all, they're recalibrated, and they can also see the other person's position, right? So I think if you're really ideological, it'll only last you so far, right? You've really got to be empathetic and see other people's position. Then you can craft, you know, whatever message you've got to do to lead them. So, as I said, Howard was very down to earth, very humble, but he had a inclusive style. I've seen others that are a bit more dictatorial, right, and they hard nosed. So I do think there are many qualities in leadership. I think you've got to have a go though. You know, often people, whether it's in your work environment, could be here, could be in your sporting organisation, you know, you've got to participate. You know, put your hand up, participate. You don't know where it's going to go, and then over time, generally you'll start to develop those skills if it's part of your nature.
Yep.
And I think honesty is really important as well. But you've got to be able to hold a message. You've got to be able to convince people, and you've got to take them with you. And a lot of that, it's not just it's not just IQ, it's EQ.
Yeah.
Right? It's the whole EQ stuff, which is so important when it comes to trying to change people's position and to do it. Hopefully, they're doing it willingly.
well, it's interesting. For you, it was getting on the bike and getting around and getting around.
Well,
Richmond.
that was the start,
Yeah.
And that was so. And I do think you've still got to be innovative, right? You've got to keep reinventing yourself or reimagining the world because the world's changing so fast, right?
Yeah,
and so you might be a great leader in industry that all of a sudden vanishes.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you do? Yeah.
What do you do? You know, if you're a BlackBerry, you thought you
Yeah.
were on top of the world, Nokia, bang, you're out of business, right?
Yeah.
So and it's happening rapidly. So and I think you still got to continue to learn too. And what I always found, and I think I was lucky, right, because I had a father who was, I spent a lot of time with him in later years, not when I was a child because he disappeared, but I learned a lot through him, and a lot of it was, treat people fairly, don't talk about them, and they'll get you a long way. And I could never really win an argument with him. He was so passionate. And you've got to believe in it, right?
Yeah.
If you're a fake, well, you're a fake.
People will sniff you out.
Yeah, people will sniff you out.
Yeah.
No, interesting.
That's fascinating. The question we might end on, Larry, is we've got a lot of listeners that are sort of in their early stage of their career, thinking about what they want to do with their life. Some of them might want to pursue a life in politics. What sort of advice would you give to that person?
Well, look, I think it's really important to have a bit of a life before then.
Yeah.
And, I see a lot of young people, they work for us and then they, become staffers and they understand the system, they understand how the voting structure works and they become members of parliament and ministers and whatever. And that's kind of fine, I get that. But I really think you need to have some skills that you can fall back on because, again, to quote my father, he had the 4 Ds of politics. He saw his father die in politics, or they leave in despair, or they leave in disgrace, or they leave in defeat, right? So you've got to have a skill that you can fall back onto, right? And so I think, and also having a life out of Parliament means you can bring some real world experience, right? Okay, so you guys, whether it's the financial markets at Morgan's or whether it's, working through, in the accounting world where it's seeing companies that are insolvent or trying to restructure them, right? Then you get to you understand how the private sector works, right? Because the private sector creates the wealth, right? And you've got to have an understanding of that to be a better policy maker. Then I think you've got to. It's very hard to run as a independent. You really got to pick a team.
Yeah.
And then if get involved in that organisation, I think it's important how the party structure works because ultimately, if you're going to run, you have to be pre-selected. Right?
Yeah.
So you've got to win pre-selections. So then you've got to get to know people. Hopefully, you've got some talent. And then you've got to win those pre-selections, and then of course, then you get into, you begin a parliamentary career. So I think find some good mentors. That's really important. A lot of people can spin it, right? So try not to get those individuals. You just need to be in the system, right? You need to be helping out in elections. You need to be helping in policy. And then you'll know whether you like it or not. Right? Because everyone says, that's great, but it's a tough life, right? And most people that are very successful in business do not make the transition. Do not make the transition to public life. Why is that? It's because, if I'm a Malcolm Turnbull, I'm head of Goldman Sachs, I run my own business, I say, righto, Will and Charlie, you do this, and if you don't do that, you get the arse. Well, you can't do that in politics, right? It's different. It's because you're being judged every 3 years. So no matter how good a job you guys might do, if you're listening to this podcast, doesn't matter if you punch the lights out and make a huge profit. Come next election cycle, they're not going to judge you on that. It could be just some whim, right? And my final comment is, if you're going to run, try to get a safe seat. But just remember, they're not safe anymore because of the preferential system. But it does help.
No, fantastic. Look, Larry, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We've learned a huge amount about life behind the walls of Parliament, and then also at the nexus between public policy and private enterprise, which I think is probably a space that is becoming increasingly challenging to navigate. And it's interesting to see the work that you and your people are doing in that space.
Pleasure. We'll keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Larry.
Doing a great
Appreciate
job
it.
on And a shout out to Max Evans. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Max.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Max.
it. Cheers.